Aidan Hennigan, do you think there's any evidence that there is a reaction against the Irish because of this bombing campaign?
Well, certainly I haven't observed it, but in the main I think that obviously if the bombing campaign got worse, there would be a type of reaction, and possibly it would affect Irish people here. Certainly I have met people, say, on the street who, while not being critical, wanted to express to me their disappointment and chagrin about what was happening, but not really in any aggressive fashion. And I feel that if the campaign did continue, that obviously this would be intensified to a certain degree. In perhaps areas where Irish people mix predominantly with English workers and they're in an isolated position, perhaps they may hear remarks of this kind. But in general, from inquiries I have made throughout all the major cities in Britain, there is no definite reaction.
Rena Holohan, would you agree with that?
I'd agree entirely. I certainly haven't experienced anything personally, but I don't know whether I'd be recognised as Irish immediately in a shop or something. And my friends too, they haven't experienced anything, but I do agree with Aidan about isolated people working with a lot of English people. There's bound to be remarks. I would agree with him, yeah.
Jim Nicholl, what about you?
Yes, of course, I'd agree with both of them, but I did, there's one instance, a friend of mine did sort of suggest to me the doctor the bombing at the Hampstead bombing a few weeks ago. A couple of days later, she went into a shop in North London, a dress shop, and she was looking around. She was obviously looked an Irish woman, and she noticed a couple of assistants sort of whispering and looking towards her, and they disappeared. And the manager came up and was quite frigid and said, "Madam, can I help you?" And she said no thanks, but left the shop. But she was quite convinced that they were sort of
they were watching her.
She was Irish and they were watching her, yes.
Aidan Hennigan, do you feel that you're watching your Irishness at the moment?
Very definitely. I say one is absolutely conscious. I think that one would refuse to engage in any banter, certainly, even in the lightest fashion about incidents that are happening. And certainly one is more cautious in talking to, not so much to one's personal friends, because I think they would understand that you weren't directly involved and wouldn't be sympathetic generally. But I'd say in ordinary places, like going into pubs perhaps, and in restaurants and that, well, you're not going to be aggressively talking about these incidents. I think to that extent that one is very conscious that it's happening. Certainly in my experience in about 12 years in Fleet Street, now I'm more aware, in fact, when this is happening, that I am Irish. Although demonstrably, there's no evidence yet, of course, that the IRA or Irish elements are responsible. But I do think, since all the publicity is given, that, you're not as sort of obviously Irish as you might be. It isn't that one might be reticent, but...
Right, but surely it's fair to say that whether the IRA is or is not involved in it, it's accepted not just by the British public, but by the British press generally. What's your reaction to that, Rena?
Yes, I do. I think that the IRA will get blamed for all sorts of acts of terrorism that happen here. The only thing is, like when that policeman was injured in East London, when we heard there was an explosion, we all thought it was the IRA because they had been blamed for other things, but the police came out immediately and said it wasn't. But until they have proof that it's somebody else, the IRA is going to get blamed. And about what Aidan was talking about, I wouldn't broadcast the fact that I'm Irish either, because I just don't want to get into an argument with people who know so little about the whole thing. Like I was talking about the bombs and the IRA with a friend the other day in a restaurant, and we kept our voices extremely low because we didn't want anybody to hear what we were talking about in case they wanted to enter into the conversation.
This is something, Jim, with your accent, with all respect to you, that you don't have to watch out for. But do you get calls to your office?
Oh yes, we had a call just a couple of weeks ago that was a bomb in the building. We've had several calls over the past few years.
But threats of any sort?
No threats, no, just that there's a bomb in the building, and we've taken precautions and there's been no bomb, fortunately. But when you're talking about backlash, about victimisation, I think that if it did happen, it would only be on a very minor, a small scale. Misguided people would probably indulge in it, but I don't think the vast majority of the British people would be bothered about it.
What do you think about that? Have you had threats in your office?
Yeah, well, we had a bomb call the other night, guy rang up and said, "There's a bomb under you," and we just told the security man. And we got another call, which was much more sinister in a sense, that a guy rang up and said if the bombing campaign didn't stop in 7 days, they were going to launch a foot and mouth disease in Ireland, which is, well, what do you do about this sort of thing? You just don't, we take note of it, but how do you treat it? You wouldn't know whether they're serious or not.
All right, Aidan, you've been here for 12 years. Have there been worse times in those 12 years than the present?
After the burning of the British Embassy in Dublin, and that had followed, of course, Bloody Sunday, I was in public house pretty near the House of Commons, and I was with an English chap, and I went up to the counter and I asked for 2 drinks, and immediately I got a wallop on the face from a fellow who was standing at the counter. You know, and it was pretty obvious that this was a reaction. It was counterproductive as far as he was concerned, because he was immediately thrown out by the Englishman behind the bar, and they were most apologetic. But in real terms, you know, that was one incident, and I think it was sort of an immediate gut reaction. But I think it's worse now, in a way, because people are being injured. And obviously, if somebody was killed, Lord forbid, I think the backlash would be infinitely worse.
What about the attitude then of British ministers and some British politicians suggesting, for instance, that Irish people should have work permits, and even going farther than that, suggesting that they should possibly be executed if they have bombs?
Well, this thing about having passport control or something for Irish people coming in here, I don't think it would really work, because the evidence, and what evidence there is, shows that the people who are carrying out these bombs, or indicates that the people that are doing these bombs are from Northern Ireland, and they're British people, not Irish, and are all have British passports, or at least are entitled to them. And how can they restrict them coming in to Britain? I can't see it working.
And what do you feel then, Jim, that the government may do?
I don't think the government's going to sort of be pushed into doing anything it doesn't want. What I think when you get members of Parliament, like we did the other day, getting quite hysterical, demanding the death penalty, demanding all these things, I don't think ordinary people recognise this as hysteria and nothing else.
Aidan, finally, is there a growing anti-Irish feeling, although possibly still inactive? Are you aware of this at all?
I don't think so. I think that at the moment, people are definitely concerned. And I think one has to remember one very important fact, that most of the incidents have happened so far in London, which to a large degree is a very anonymous city. And people do travel out of the city to a certain degree. Therefore, they read immediately in the papers and then they go home and tend to forget about it. I would say certainly no immediate reaction against the Irish, but the crux and the nub of the matter will surely be, if this is continued and sustained and somebody is killed, I think we can predict what possibly might happen if that situation arises.